Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodons Mods. This is Otaku Showboat, and in this tutorial I'll be going over Rayon and batteries. As per usual, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to help make this tutorial series appear higher up in search results. You can also do all the social stuff. All the links are below this video. Twitch, follow, Twitter, follow, visit website, become a patron on Patreon, help support Pyanodons Mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon, all the usual things. As a disclaimer, Pyanodons mods are in a constant state of flux, so any numbers that I present may change. The mods for this particular save file are nearly identical to my stream save, the list of which is on my website stream schedule page, also below the video. The only difference is that I'm using the Infinity mod to show off what this all looks like today. So, where are we, grand scheme of things, in the series of tutorials thus far? We have just gotten military science after having gotten green science and set up nickel and zinc processing. So, we now need Rayon for batteries for laser turrets in order to start making molybdenum, to start mining molybdenum. That is where we're at right now. So, Rayon is made in pulp mills, and it requires a lot of things. It requires 6 things. It requires urea, fiber, sodium carbonate, carbonyl sulfide, ammonia, and sulfuric acid. Now, at this point in the game, if you are in the early game and you're setting this up for the first time, chances are you have urea, you have raw fiber, but not fiber, you have ammonia through the conversion of urea into cyanic acid and ammonia, and you may have sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid coming from the vanilla recipe or something along those lines at this point. Because the vanilla recipe for sulfuric acid still does exist and is available in the early game. There will, however, be alternatives to get sulfuric acid through the actual Pyanodons mods itself. This one is very useful because there are various ways of getting acid gas, but all of that is a topic for another time. Some also really like this one, but yeah, or some like things that give acid gas as a byproduct, things like the refined syngas recipes, here giving a bit of acid gas as well as refined, so plenty of thoughts about sulfuric acid. This video is going to really be discussing the things that you may not know or have set up at this point that aren't quite as simple as something like sulfuric acid. So we're going to assume that you know at this point how to get urea, as well as how to get fiber, well, raw fiber at this point, not necessarily fiber itself. And we're going to focus on getting the green stuff, our sodium carbonate, our carbonyl sulfide, and our actual fiber. Now, fiber, you may be able to see and tell here, what the hell is this building? This building is the vanilla centrifuge. That's right, the vanilla centrifuge for doing nuclear processing. Yeah, that's what this thing is used for, is converting raw fiber into fiber and organic matter. You will, of course, have to do something with your organic matter. And just to feed these 2 pulp mills, that's 5 fiber per second. Of course, this is all without modules because this is being built assuming that you're not at Circuit 2s yet to be able to make modules. Once you are able to make modules, everything changes. Literally everything changes. So, you need centrifuges. Centrifuge. As you can see, the centrifuge recipe requires a lot of things. It's a lot of stuff at this point in the game. Particularly, this may be the first time you're really going to be consuming concrete. So you need to make sure that you are able to have concrete production going. Of course, the vanilla recipe here from iron, stone, and water, stone bricks and water, is probably the preferred method because you can use automated factories in the early game. So you can actually use the automated factories to make the concrete. Otherwise, you're forced into using the rich clay and sulfuric acid recipe, which I would not ever recommend. Sulfuric acid is actually somewhat expensive to get because you need a lot of it. Granted, you can mine the sulfur if you're interested in doing mining. You can mine the sulfur, you just need to feed fuel into the miners, whatever like coal-based fuel that you want to give to the mining drills to mine the sulfur nodes that exist all around the map. They look a little bit like this. These sulfur veins, they have little sulfur mines that need fuel. The fuel is not drill heads, it is standard fuel for those. And so yeah, that will lead into your sulfuric. So that is how to get the centrifuges. You need to have a lot of engine units, a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, pretty much. That's what you need for your centrifuges. Otherwise, it's just fiber in, or raw fiber in, and fiber plus organic matter out. Carbonyl sulfide. This stuff is primarily used for Rayon. Carbonyl sulfide is primarily used in Rayon, but it's also used in Z3 reagent or Z3 reagent, which is involved in your silver lead / your lead processing steps. So do bear in mind that it's primarily only really going to be used for Rayon. It is coal plus sulfur plus propene. Now, early game, green science, setting up Rayon for the first time. Your only real way of getting propene is through this gasifier recipe, taking lead plus syngas plus steam and making propene plus water. You will likely want to void the water, but 10 per second. 10 per second is actually enough to feed 6 Mark 1 high-pressure furnaces. It's actually more than enough, because this consumes 9, and that makes 18 units per second. Well, we need 16 2/3 per second of the carbonyl sulfide here. So that is fine. The urea is also easy enough, because when you see ammonia, well, the ammonia is easy enough, because when you see ammonia, you should be immediately thinking urea. And in fact, there will be a recipe that is just straight up urea to ammonia. So just think of ammonia as just more urea, and urea is OGS, which is, well, either just mushrooms or mushrooms and raw fiber for an even better output of the urea. At this point in time, that will of course change with Pi Alien Life. As for our sodium carbonate, at Green Science, in order to get the sodium sulfate, you must go through sodium bisulfate. You must go through sodium bisulfate to get sodium sulfate at Green Science. At Blue Science, there is a more efficient way of getting sodium sulfate, but I will have a look at that off to the side after covering this. So sodium bisulfate is going to be salt plus sulfuric acid, and it will give you hydrogen chloride. So this is actually a decent way of getting some extra hydrogen chloride to go into all of the processes that needs it. It's a way of avoiding lamps to make hydrogen chloride, as well as avoiding having to split saline water to get the hydrogen and chlorine, as well as it avoids like doing Tholen-based chlorine, so plenty of stuff. But it requires a lot of salt. Now, this may be somewhat okay if you have a lot of salt mines to tap into, or if you are building out a lot of mushrooms to coal to tar to saline water to salt. If you're building all of that out, or if you're willing to spend the stone, or spend the iron for stone, for tar, for saline water, for salt, you can think of it as spending iron for salt in this context as well. But that has its own other set of byproducts and things that you have to deal with, some of which can actually give you more power as well as more iron back out of the system, so you can always consider that. And then the next step is just taking your bisulfate plus more salt to give you more hydrogen chloride with the sodium sulfate. So lots of hydrogen chloride here. And bear in mind, all these beautiful things, all 14 here and all 7 here of these mixers, is feeding 14 of our carbonate, our sodium carbonate, to have enough sodium carbonate to feed 2 Rayon pulp mills. 2 Rayon pulp mills. That's it. That's 2. Just 2. Just 2. 14. So you could think of it sort of as 7 to 1. 4 to 7 to 7 to 1-ish. However, once you do get into blue science, this process unlocked. This is the slacked lime loop process to give you sodium sulfate. Or shall we say, to give you sodium hydroxide to give you sodium sulfate. What is the slacked lime loop for sodium hydroxide that gets unlocked at this tech level? Well, what I'll point out is that in total, the amount of salt is lessened. The amount of salt is lessened I'm pretty sure that the total amount of salt is less for the same output here. You are, however, going, and I think it's less sulfuric acid overall. So it's less on both fronts, but you're going to be spending sodium hydroxide here, as well as the ingredients for it. So you're instead going to be spending coke here for this. So at the cost of a lot of coke you can produce as much sodium hydroxide as you want. Now the special thing here, well, as much coke and as much salt, coke and salt is basically what you have here in this loop. But what you do is you have just an initial amount of limestone to make lime, because that's a 1-to-1 relationship, and then it's 1 to 10 lime into slacked lime. Note that you get a 10th back as limestone here for the slacked lime in. So this is a closed loop of limestone being produced out of your sodium hydroxide to go back into produce lime at the cost of coke, and then into slacked lime. So you're spending coke to get sodium hydroxide as well as salt. So coke and salt for sodium hydroxide, and then you go in and you spend that sodium hydroxide with a bit of sulfuric acid on your sodium sulfate, and overall this is a more efficient system because it's going to be a smaller footprint than spending all of that salt. It's going to be more convenient than spending more salt through doing this process for you. That being said, that comes only after blue science. So that is your glorious sodium carbonate. Note that it does have CO2 out as well. That's your sodium carbonate, your carbonyl sulfide. You've got your urea, and you've got your fiber, and you've got your ammonia. That is Rayon. In simple terms, that is Rayon. Now, up here, this is a setup that I have designed. The blueprint is available in my Discord in a blueprints channel in a larger book of blueprints. Although it does have a slight error in that it does not include this section here, so do bear that in mind if you are going to use any of my blueprints. Sometimes there's little things like this in it where I just missed something. I will see about fixing that and updating things going forward, so be sure to check to make sure whether or not that is available. So what is this? This is urea plus raw fiber, or fiber is how I should put it. This is that with remove unfiltered. So that is like a provider chest to make sure that you get rid of all of the organic matter as this system moves. So this is enough to feed. It's supposed to be enough to feed 10 per second of rayon of fiber plus of the urea. Of course, we're using the raw fiber plus mushrooms to feed into the urea. And I'm doing the lamps plus sand plus clay plus CO2 plus water recipe for raw fiber. Basically the one right below the recipe for that uses fertilizer as well. You don't have to use this recipe. In fact, I would highly suggest that because this uses lamps, probably don't use this recipe, but bear in mind that that inherently means that you're going to need more buildings as a result. So you need to spend more space instead of spending copper and iron and glass for your lamps. And yes, I've done a funny and I've put high-tech Logibots around the place if you see them buzzing by to do this, because this is partially bot-based. At least in part, this is bot-based in that it needs to bring in the lamps as produced here, and it needs to bring in all of the stuff for the lamps from outside production. So something like this, I mean, this is like 30 per second. This is a red belt of sand that has its own blueprint. This is all the clay just done on site. Bringing in via robots the coke production here. And doing the on-site CO2 out of logs into organic matter. Granted, you could loop back your organic matter here to just make the CO2 required for your kickoff plantations, but I'm not sure if it actually gives enough. It probably does. It likely does. It likely does in this amount of centrifuges, but I haven't done that math. But that would be an option. But it's so easy to do this. Like this is permanent and lasts forever and doesn't like depend on stuff not backing up. Anyway, that is starting to digress. So let us move on to batteries. There are 4 recipes for batteries that exist. 4 recipes. The first one is the, quote, vanilla battery recipe. It has been modified slightly, though. This recipe is copper plus rayon plus zinc plus sulfuric acid equals batteries. Now, in this case, it is 2 units of rayon per battery. 2 units of rayon per battery. This is really bad. This is really bad. Really bad. Do not do this recipe if you are using Pi High Tech and have rayon. Do not do this recipe ever. 2 units per battery is really expensive. Really expensive. Similarly, the next 2 recipes. This recipe takes coke plus rayon plus pyrite plus lead plus sulfuric acid to make batteries in a 1-to-1 ratio of rayon to batteries. But you'll have to go through and make pyrite. You're going to probably want pyrite. You can make it at Green Science, but you're going to be primarily spending your pyrite on solar panels, because you need pyrite for solar panels. This other recipe ditches the pyrite for a bit more lead, and instead of coke, it's glass. So now we're spending glass, more lead, the same amount of sulfuric acid, and the same amount of rayon to do batteries. This recipe is objectively better than this one, because you are not spending A, pyrite, B, coke. In terms of just volume of resources, this is the better recipe, although I would argue coke is free, more easily free, and pyrite is iron oxide, which, yeah, you can get plenty of. Like, you will be flooded with iron oxide. Like, I'm just gonna throw that out there. You'll be flooded with rust. With your rusty iron. Oxidized iron. So, while okay, while good, while better than this recipe for sure, and likely better than this one in terms of volume of resources required to go into batteries, it's still 1-to-1 on your rayon into batteries. Then I present to you this recipe for batteries. This recipe for batteries is 1-to-3. 1 rayon for 3 batteries. That is significantly more efficient of a use of your rayon. It does, however, come at a significant cost of 9 sodium hydroxide per second per assembling machine 1, or assembling machine 2. You won't have access to assembling machine 2s yet, but anyway. Regardless, you'll have an even worse time of it, because it'll want even more if you use automated factories for this, which you do have access to, because automated factories are faster than this. They have a crafting speed of 1.25? What even is? Or 1.5? 1.5 on these. So it's like, okay, well. Yeah, 18 to 1.8. Let's think of this instead as a 10 sodium hydroxide per unit of rayon. 10 sodium hydroxide per unit of batteries, I should say, not rayon, of batteries. Why am I talking about batteries in this episode that is primarily about rayon? Well, it's because you need the batteries for the laser turrets. That's why. It's like you need batteries to make laser turrets. In fact, if we go here, laser turrets. Laser turrets will require batteries, optical sets, which you should be actually making an excess of in your green science chains, circuit board ones, and duralumin. This is very simple. You need these in order to make, if I can find under what place it is, these guys. Our beautiful molybdenum mines, which will need steel engine units, electric mining drills, laser turrets, niobium iron alloy. Hence why we've covered niobium before this. As well as a lot of circuit board ones to make your molybdenum mines. Further, when you go into actually mining your molybdenum, you're also going to need to have refined syngas, which I sort of alluded to a little bit ago on the methods of getting like acid gas for sulfuric acid. It's like, hey, there's this other recipe that I'm unsure if we have access to yet, but all of that will be covered in our next tutorial, which will be Molybdenum processing. Oh boy, molybdenum processing is going to be a very similar video to the niobium video because it is just a very set chain that over time you'll be able to add productivity modules to get more out of it. But just preview, without modules, it is 15 ore in and a half a plate out. 15 ore in and a half a plate out per second for each of those. So it is not particularly wonderful of an output. It is meant to be rare. It is fortunately not going to be quite used all that much until you get into the later phases of the game, going into purple and yellow sciences. So you've got some time before you have to worry about before the massive explosion of the amount of molybdenum plates and that you'll need, and the amount of molybdenum trioxide that you'll need. Both of which will be needed in vast quantities for A, super alloy, B, super steel. So, yeah. Anyway, we'll talk a lot more about that later. Batteries themselves... Actually, well, first I'll end off by going over just what exactly is Rayon used for outside of batteries. It is used in a good biofilm recipe. I would actually suggest this biofilm recipe is the first one that you get access to, and it is fairly easy to set up. If you've managed to set yourself up a nice Rayon production facility, then yeah, this is fine. This is fine. You'll not need a lot of biofilm at the very least in the ore processing setups that use biofilm at Blue Science. So that's something you'll be concerned about more towards Blue Science range of things. Fiberglass needed for circuit 3s / 4s because it's used for the circuit PCB 3s. It's used for PCB 3s, which is used for mounted circuit substrate, which is considered PCB 3-2, and that is used in PCB 4 as well as circuit board 3s, and which is therefore 3s and 4s. So, crystallographic substrate, incredibly important. An incredibly important substance. You will want to do particle acceleration, and for particle acceleration, to make your proton receivers or donors, you will need a lot of crystallographic substrate for that. So this uses Rayon plus nichrome plus surets plus propene. But at Blue Science, when you'll be thinking about all of this, you will have access to a Tholin-based option for propene, so you won't have to feel the need to spend your syngas and lead plus steam on propene. So do bear that in mind. You can do it out of Tholins at Blue Science. Diamagnetic material, late game substance used in several Mark III things, high-tech bots, space science stuff, all of that late game stuff. Similarly, harmonic absorbers, again, late game stuff, late game Mark IIIs and 4s and high-tech bots and all that good stuff. And that will just about cover it. So ultimately, though, your largest consumer is probably going to be in batteries, unless you're doing just an absolute metric F-ton of particle acceleration, in which case then it's probably going to be particle acceleration. But you can see batteries get used in a lot of stuff. Mark II bots, in particular, need these batteries. Mark II bots, Nextlit-powered accumulators, are really good accumulators. And particularly, we now have this recipe for laser modules. This was relatively new, this recipe. Oh, and you need batteries for mounted circuit substrates. So the first time you'll see a demand spike for the continual use of batteries outside of making robots at Mark II will be when making your mounted circuit substrate for circuit 3s. So you have a lot of time before you really need batteries for anything outside of like the laser turrets once to make a mining setup for molybdenum, or for accumulators. Laser modules has a brand new recipe that you can now have. The original recipe is here. You needed laser turrets to get a whole bunch of components of the laser turrets and a laser module. Now you can directly make laser modules for the cost of plastic batteries, optical sets, and circuit board 2s. These are used for YAG laser modules for the optical parametric oscillator for utility science. As well as for space science and several other buildings at Mark IV. So, when doing when doing utility science, this is a lot of stuff, including super steel. My goodness, a lot of stuff. But these optical oscillators are going to need those laser modules for them, and yeah, that's a new way. It's just directly spending batteries to get them. So another thing to demand batteries that leads into a science in the end. So with that, we are now finished with our Rayon and batteries tutorial. I would like to thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku Showboat, and I will see you all again in our next tutorial, which will be the molybdenum overview, the molybdenum processing overview. I hope to see you all then. Be sure to do all the social stuff, comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, go into the description below this video and do all the follows and thingies in the links below this video. And again, I hope to see you all on the next one.